spring equinox behind us on the weekend. The tides have changed and it's time for a new season. Finally, spring. Not the 1st of September, as so many people seem to think, but of course, somewhere between the 21st and the 24th this year. It was the 23rd of September, last Sunday, the spring equinox. And we know that the spring equinox means a lot to the weather, to the plants, to ourselves and all the creatures on the planet. We love the arrival of spring and we look forward to growth and new things and all sorts of amazing stuff happening out there in the world and in nature. And we have grown to think of ourselves as somehow separate from nature, either thinking that we're better and bigger or whatever, or perhaps bemoaning the fact that we seem to have lost our contact with nature. Well, it turns out that like all creatures on this planet, we have and retain a strong connection to nature. So where's it gone and what do we do about it? What I want to do tonight is give you the opportunity to find out how to reconnect with nature in the most simple way, but in the same way that those seasonal cycles work, so that you too can have your fresh beginning like spring. Let's have a look at what this means. What I'm suggesting is that just like everything else on this planet, we too go through cycles. Pretty much everything does. And I think that one of the meanings of astrology, one of the purposes of astrology, is to understand and make use of those cycles. Even though in ancient times people were developing their study of astrology gradually by observation, mostly in order to understand how to use cycles in order to anticipate what might happen on Earth. And while they might have had all sorts of beliefs about planets and signs and omens and all of those kind of things, the truth is we don't really know why astrology works, but what does seem to be one of its key factors is that essentially it is the study of cycles. After all, the Babylonians watched the sky for over 1,000 years, committing everything they saw into writing and gradually developing the art of astrology from there. And the point is that whatever they might have believed they were watching, whatever they might have believed was the cause of the effects that they were noticing on Earth, the bottom line is that they were recording cycles. They wrote down the weather every day and they wrote down the positions of the stars and planets and other phenomena they could see in the sky. And to the extent that those are all controlled by or connected to nature, whatever's really behind them, by writing them down every day, the Babylonians discovered patterns and established the relationship of those patterns with ourselves on Earth. So they really discovered the cyclical nature of the human experience. We know some of that from even our modern sciences, even like medicine, where we understand that there are an enormous number of cycles going by all the time in the body, many of them connected to what is called the circadian rhythm. They're things that our body has to do every day and at certain times every day, and it manages to mostly maintain awareness of that time, which is an approximate daily cycle. Experiments have shown that if we are kept from the sun, we actually lose track of how long a day is. So we are constantly adjusting our own cycle to the sun. And that, if you think about it, sounds a lot like most other things on this planet. We know that plants grow according to the sun. Many of them will flower or perform other activities according to the length of the day. Indeed, that spring flowering that I've spoken about, that many people so often panic, spring's too early. Actually, most plants that flower in spring are going according to day length. And no matter how much climate change happens and no matter how much human beings destroy the environment, the one thing in that equation that absolutely cannot change is the length of the day, which, as you know, changes on a day-by-day basis, and since the equinox on Sunday has gradually been getting longer. Plants respond to that shift according to their own agendas, and will start responding to the arrival of spring. Here I am saying that we actually observe the sun on a daily basis, unconsciously to ourselves. Our bodies are paying attention to it and using the sun to keep track of how long 24 hours actually is. We're always amazed about how well our body keeps time. And you can tell yourself to wake up at a certain time tomorrow morning, and you usually will, and so on. Well, that timekeeping is partly related to inner rhythms and partly related to adjusting them to outer rhythms. So what does that have to do with astrology? Well, it has to do a lot. Firstly, one of the most fundamental cycles, we'll be talking much more about this, is the sun. The astrologers watch the sun. I mean, modern people know, really, that when we're talking astrology, we're often talking about what are called sun signs, which is really a way of referring to where the sun is in its yearly cycle. The sun appears to move in the sky. It's a way of measuring our own Earth's seasonal cycle. So when we watch the movement of the sun over the course of the year, we are tracking the Earth's cycle, which we also experience as the seasonal cycle. What causes that equinox to happen on Sunday and all the other times in the year when things really change is the relationship between ourselves and the sun. As we go around the sun, because the Earth is tilted at 4 different points, the nature of the cycle changes. Moving from the equator, it will take 3 months to get to the first tropic, where will be the longest day and the shortest night, and then it'll take another 3 months to get back to the equator, where day and night will be equal as they were on Sunday. Then it takes another 3 months to get to the other tropic, let's say the Tropic of Capricorn here in the southern hemisphere, where again you have a longest day and a shortest night, and back to the equator another 3 months later. And because of climate and other variations, it's not exactly 3 months in terms of how we see the weather out there, but certainly in terms of how we see the shift that happens to the sun and the different responses of the different creatures and plants on Earth. And that brings us back to ourselves. I believe that one of the reasons why we see so much in our ancient culture about stories about seasons, stories about the sun and its movement, and most interestingly of all, the famous old stories about the 7-year cycle. What does that 7-year cycle have to do with it? Because quite frankly, that one is everywhere. You'll find it in the Bible, you'll find it in classic old texts, you'll find it in philosophical texts, you'll find it in little chirps of wisdom like the 7-year itch, the 7-year sabbatical, the 7-year apprenticeship. All of these constructions around the length of time of 7 years seem to be related to a very ancient tradition. And the questions astrologers ask and answer is, why were the ancients so interested in telling us about 7-year cycles all the time? Well, mostly they were trying to say, if you understand that time is cyclical, and if you understand that you yourself, as a human being, are going through those cycles, you will be able to manage your life better. You will be able to anticipate the kind of things that are happening and that could happen. In fact, if you understand the cyclical nature of time, you can anticipate, predict, prepare for some of your experiences as a human being and manage them better. Because you know what's happening to you, you don't panic, and you make choices and decisions appropriate to what's happening. That is the reason why people visit astrologers, because astrologers will give them that information in an enormous amount of detail and very precisely. But even without having an astrologer handy, you yourself can look at 2 of your most important cycles all on your own and adjust your life accordingly. So I'm going to start off with that solar cycle, which is of course our most important cycle, our daily rhythm, and in fact our yearly rhythm. Our most fundamental structures of time are the day and the year, and both of those are based on the apparent movement of the sun in the sky, or the actual movement of the earth. We're the earth, we're the creatures of earth, as I was saying. The sun is our life giver. So it's really the relationship between the two that is observable from Earth as the apparent movement of the sun over the course of a day and over the course of a year. Over the course of the day, as it moves from east to west and back again, one circuit of the whole sky, and over the course of the year, as it moves from the beginning of the zodiac gradually through the whole circle of the zodiac in the course of a full year. So we measure time by that. We then regulate all our earthly activities by that. And the year is not arbitrary because it's a solar cycle. Everything on earth that is not under our control, nature, goes according to that year and restarts again at the beginning of every year. We as modern people live in a world that often rejects the idea of a birthday. We do it for children because growing up is important, because it's an opportunity for them to get presents and to gain friendships, and so it's part of our socialization process of children, part of the experience of growing up and how we confer different privileges and requirements on our children as age progresses. But when we reach adulthood, we like to pretend that we're not having birthdays. We like to forget that we're growing older, and even if that's not the issue, we often simply regard the birthday as it's really just an anniversary. But it's actually more than that. It is the start of your own yearly seasonal cycle. So I want to give you a little method where you can actually plan your year better. And by your year, I mean birthday to birthday rather than January to December. Now, as a modern person, you are also living the January to December year, perhaps as your school year or as related to your work or so on. And it's possible, depending on your profession and your life, you might consider the tax year your year, where the whole structure of your daily life, because of the importance of your work, is focused around that. Generally speaking, what I'm about to tell you applies from birthday to birthday, but apply it as you wish to the course of a year. And it's to understand that what astrology and nature have taught us is that the structure of a year is that it has 4 stages, because we measure years by the sun. So whichever way we're doing it, after 3 months, the sun is 90 degrees away from where it was before. And nature, experience, and astrology all point out that change happens at that 90-degree turn. The 90-degree turn of the sun is what gives us the seasons. So, start on your birthday and count the 3-month, 6-month, and 9-month dates from there. So, if you were born, say, today, you were born today on the 28th of September, say, then you will look at the 28th of each month 3 months down the line. 28th of September, 28th of December, 28th of March, and 28th of June. Those dates, all 3 months apart, are the beginnings of your seasons. So, you can chop your year up into the quarter. Then what do we do with that information? Well, the purpose that the ancients were telling it to us in the first place is to learn to live according to nature. If you follow nature's example, you can adjust anything in your life. Even as a modern technological human being, you can adjust anything to fit those stages. So the first stage is spring. Spring is establishing something, planting the seeds, working what's necessary, doing hard work usually, to make things grow, and by late in that 3-month stage, or as you approach the end of that 3-month stage, weeding out what isn't working, weeding out the weeds. So, when planning your year from birthday to birthday, you plan that the first 3 months are where I establish my plans for this year. Keep them simple, 1 or 2 major new plans per year. You don't plant lots of crops in a field. You won't even be able to tell the difference between the weeds and the crops in that case. Usually 1 crop per field, but we'll allow you a little bit more. We're human beings, not crops. Fine. So you set up my big plan this year is this year I want to do this, I want to finally get on top of that, or finally I'm going to write this book, or finally I'm going to, and whatever it may be, you take the first 3 months as laying the groundwork, putting things in place, but importantly, the part we don't know about because we forget about nature, just before you reach the 3-month deadline, you must have started and completed by 3 months the weeding out process. Identify what's not working and focus on what is working. Do the strengthening of those roots that's required, because the second 3 months of your personal year is summer, and summer is when things grow. So it's in those summer years that we really put all our energy into. Now we can see what's working and what isn't. We eliminated what isn't. So we focus now on the adjusted version of the goal that we established at our birthday. The adjusted version means we've taken reality into context. We can see how we have to adjust to the actual world and what's actually going on out there. And so now we've got 3 months to really focus on building and growing. Summer is the growing time, and we're just like those crops. Then, 6 months after your birthday, you get to the autumn phase. Autumn is about winding things down and reaping results. So from 6 months after your birthday to 9 months after your birthday, you've got to start looking at, is that the result I'm expecting, or is that any result? What is the result I'm getting? Am I not getting a result? What have I learned for next time? Does this plant or fruit work for me? Am I doing something wrong that despite all my growing, I'm not really getting the results I'm seeing? There's a limit to agricultural metaphors, but the process is very similar, where you begin to see if my fruit is not really happening, if I'm not really getting product from all that hard work, next time I can re-strategize, maybe plant a different crop. But it gives us this opportunity for both reaping rewards and assessing of those rewards by the time 9 months has passed. And from the 9 months to the 12-month anniversary, to the next birthday, is the winter period. The period we always forget in our lives. And the winter period is when we don't do important things, is when we let go of those, we can strategize. But winter is about lying fallow and becoming fertile again. That's what the fields and the land wants to do. So that's what we do for ourselves. We don't get a 3-month holiday. That is not the world we live in. But we certainly can let go of this critical sense of what must produce and what must happen. We can then focus on the new strategies for the new year, but most importantly, what fallow is all about, rebuilding our creativity. So depending on the type of thing that it is for you, maybe exploring other possibilities, other alternatives you didn't try, what didn't work, getting back to some of the stuff you weeded, acknowledging when maybe you've been traveling down the wrong path. That 3-month phase is good for that. Think about what happens if these were scrambled. If you were doing that somewhere in the middle, you would lose faith, you would lose hope, you might become torn about which direction to take. We actually get in our own way because we don't give things their proper time. But work with that 1-year schedule and you'll be amazed to discover that you feel more on top of things and things will seem to cooperate with you a whole lot better. It's not magic, and of course all sorts of things are happening all the time. It's not that only growing happens at that time and only planting. There's in between, there's all sorts of stuff. We've got goals that begin at all sorts of times, not only our birthdays, but that general structure, because self-assessment and self-reflection is so important, gives us a structure to assess our year, that seemingly most important, critical period of time. Zooming out to what I was saying about the 7-year process, it actually works the same. Weren't those ancestors trying to say you would have 7 years of this, followed by 7 years of that, 7 years of gain, 7 years of drought? And they were talking about an up and down 7-year rhythm. It is largely correct. If you look at your life, you'll largely see that the periods of gain loosely club together. Periods where things haven't worked out loosely club together in 7-year phases. I mean, let's be real, a lot of stuff happens in 7 years. You can't neatly categorize everything that happened in your life in one way. But if you understand the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is just the same. It's spring, summer, autumn, winter. It's a 4-stage cycle of a little over 7 years each. So the way to figure out where in your life are you at any particular time? Well, the 3 big astrological years are the age birth to the age of 29. The cycles are 7.25 each. So that's one complete cycle of 29 years. Its seasons every quarter are about 7.25 years. It's measured from the planet Saturn. So the first phase of life, 29 years, 29 to 59 about, the second phase of life, and 59 to 87 or so, the third phase of life. Whichever phase you're in, then look at where are you in the 7-year stages. Divide that up into 7. So let's take 29 to about 35, 36 is spring. 35, 36 to about 42, 43 is summer. 43 to about 50, 51 is autumn. And 51 to about 58, 59 is winter. In the spring years, whether we're talking about your career, let's use the career as an example because those are the middle years of life. So in the spring years, you are establishing your career. You're laying the foundations and doing the groundwork. And 29 to 36, still identifying what isn't working for you. Weeding. So you don't have to think critically, oh my word, I'm 33, I'm 34, I need to be an adult, I need to have children, I need to be in charge of everything. It's the spring years. You're just establishing stuff. From 35 or 36 to 42 or 43, you will be able to get into the growing phase. Now you're really making things work. There are other things that happen to that during that time. Astrologers identify the midlife crisis period as happening from the very beginning of the 40s or the very, very end of the 30s into the early 40s because of other cycles that we measure. One day we'll talk about those. So a lot of stuff happens in those summer years, but still there's the growth of the career and finding ourselves what really works for us. And then from 43 or so to about 50, 51 are the reward years. That's when we finally got the money to do the things we want, when we got the adult car and the adult place in the world and all those powers and responsibilities and parenthood that accrue to adults are mostly concentrated in those years. You're probably a parent already, but those are the years that the children will mature. So those are really where things come to fruition, and then that leaves winter, the last 7 years, 51 or so to 58. Or that would be the 20s if you're under 29, and that would of course be the 80s if you're over 60. And those are the years about letting go of your existing identity. If you're in your 20s, it's about letting go of the child and discovering the adult. If you're in the 50s, it's about letting go of the adult, the person who had all those responsibilities and duties and obligations and taxes and children, and figuring out, now that I'm finally on my own terms, what am I going to be in the next stage of life? So what used to be retirement is these days the next stage of life. People in the 50s in the past used to prepare for retirement. Nowadays they have to figure out what is chapter 3. So the 50s is when people can rediscover their creativity, explore new things, lie fallow. Still got to do all the duties, kids, work and so on, and rediscover. And the 80s, as people face the last phase of their life, letting go of their adulthood and their primary role in the world as they reach the elderly status of the 80s and perhaps the 90s, and allowing the creativity there to be spiritual creativity. It's in the last phase of life that we answer the spiritual questions, that we try and figure out what is the meaning of me and what is the meaning of life. Why am I here and what is this? What is this really even all about? Those mysteries, while we worry about them from the earliest age, are actually only solvable at the oldest age. And so the natural cycle of 7 allow us to go through our phases of life growth, just like the natural cycle, same based on chopping it into 4, allows us to grow through the daily and yearly growth of our lives. Those are just 2 simple examples. There are many more cycles that astrologers look at, and of course they all overlap and they're a little bit more complex because they affect each other as well. But most fundamentally of all, by learning to identify and take charge of our own cycles, we learn to take charge of our own lives. As we've discussed previously on this show, there's so much that we're not in charge of. But for the little we are, if we learn about how cycles work, how nature works and how we works, we can feel more in control, more in charge of our lives, and more prepared for just about anything. Well, of course, to get the full benefits of knowledge about cycles, you'll have to go and see an astrologer who will work out your own personal cycles for you. But all of us can learn to be more attuned with nature. I'll be back next week, 8 p.m. Don't forget the new time of the show here on Cape Town TV and everywhere on YouTube and Facebook, where we'll be looking at an interesting development in the world of palmistry and a great interview. Don't miss it.